Drew Maxey. He is the writer behind the video game we're watching right now, Justice League Cosmic Chaos. He's come to answer some questions for us, all us St. Louis people, as a St. Louis native.
Yeah, born and raised.
There you go. He's also a full-time public school teacher, probably the coolest public school teacher. I'm sure all your students are like, I can't believe this is happening right now. So, let's just get into it, right?
Cool.
You want to go first, Brian?
Well, now I'm curious to what grade you teach.
I was teaching just seniors. I did just change schools, so when the new year starts up, I'll be in a totally different school. I don't know what I'm teaching yet. So,
okay.
like what grade level?
Yeah.
They usually don't tell you that until like a week before you start teaching classes. So that's how much preparation there was.
Okay, and so how did you, so was DC just going around from public school, contacting different teachers, being like, hey, can you write for us? Or?
No. So the way that I got this job, I always say that everything in my life that I have, I got from being in a punk rock band, and that is definitely true of this. So we got to go back a little bit. I was in a band. We were touring. We did a tour with another band who we became really close friends with, and the singer of that band is the art director for a studio called PHL Collective. It is an independent gaming studio that he and his friends make. They created it from the ground up themselves, and we were always talking about his job and just how interesting it was. And then, like, fast forward to the end of 2020, like December 2020, he sends me a DM on Instagram that is essentially just like, hey, I want to have a meeting with you tomorrow. I didn't know what it was about, and then it's him and the head of the studio basically saying, we pitched to Warner Brothers to do a Justice League game, and nobody on our staff knows enough about the Justice League to write a whole story about them. And your name came up. They had seen my TikToks where I was going like in depth into analysis of characters specifically in DC, and basically said like, we want to hire you if you're up for it. And originally I said no, because I had only written stuff that was short. I didn't know how to write a 10-hour game.
Yeah.
And then they talked me into it essentially. And then yeah, that's how it happened. So if I hadn't been in that band, I wouldn't have done this.
Was it for punk rock?
Yeah. Everything in my life, being a teacher, doing this, anything I have comes from just being in punk bands.
Wow. Okay, that's good incentives. I think that's a good
Always.
lesson for kids. And so you said you've written shorter things. What kind of shorter things did you write?
I mean, I wrote short stories, mostly in college, but also I wrote some for myself. But I've always been really interested in writing comics. So I was writing like 4 or 5 page comics. I wrote 2 full like 28-page single issues of a series that ended up we didn't go forward with. But you know, we had these first 2 issues, so I at least had some experience in writing in a script form, and then it just kind of translated into this.
What an interesting story though. If I think about how often people are like, oh, I gotta work on my portfolio, oh, I gotta put this out there, and you know, they were like, this guy knows a lot about Justice League, and he's posting about it on TikTok.
Yeah, I mean, it's so strange that like, of all the places, TikTok was one of the things that TikTok can make a punk band led me to working on Superman, you know?
Do you feel like your success with this will maybe lead you back into comics?
Yes. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I'm going to because it's very cool.
Okay.
After the game came out, now keep in mind, I did not have any direct contact with anybody at DC. But after the game came out, the head of DC Interactive DM'd me on Instagram. And he was just like, the game is cool, we appreciate what you did. because you brought a lot of knowledge and also just your own flavor to it. And then he was just like, we're going to keep you in mind for future projects. Also, have you ever thought about writing comics? And I was just like, yep, sure have.
Wow.
And then he said, he was like, put together a portfolio and email it to me. And so I did that a couple weeks ago.
Ah,
Excellent. Nice. Yeah.
I'm so excited. Congratulations.
We'll see if anything comes out.
Yeah.
Still, I'm so excited. And so you mentioned that this all kind of started in 2020, which I feel like, unless you're like 2 years old, we all remember that as being a particularly interesting year. How did COVID affect the production process of this?
I mean, really, it didn't. Everybody at the studio was like working from home. They are all East Coast based, and I obviously am not in the East Coast, so I would just work from home, keep track of my own hours, stuff like that, and just work on it whenever I wasn't working on school stuff. And yeah, with something like game development, I mean, you don't have to be around a lot of people, so it worked out pretty well for it.
Yeah. How many hours did you put into it? It's about a 10-hour game, you said?
It's a 10-hour game. I would say that I wrote between 15 to 20 hours per week for a year and 5-6 months, something like that. So, how the math
That's a good amount of time.
Yeah.
That's a lot of time.
Yeah.
A lot more than 10 hours, right?
Yeah.
That's amazing. And so I do remember also, Mascot, we talked a little bit before this, but you mentioning that the story development process of this was interesting, kind of that back and forth. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So, I don't know if anybody here has played the game already. I'll give you the very basic story. Story is that there's this old character named Snapper Carr who he basically was like the Justice League's mascot in the 60s. Justice League then operated in a place called Happy Harbor, and the stories were a lot more, they were strange, they were interesting, more sci-fi stories back then. You know, it was a little bit more whimsical. So the story for the game is about this character who is an imp from the fifth dimension. His name is Mixia Spitalik. Old Superman character, again from like the 60s. And his whole goal is just to annoy Superman. He shows up, this is him here. He shows up, he annoys Superman. In most iterations of the character, you get him to go away by tricking him into saying his own name backwards. And then he gets banished back to the fifth dimension and he can't return for 90 days. Obviously, getting him to trick himself into saying his own name is not really conducive to like a fun video game, you know? So we just kind of didn't really pay attention to that, and instead, he comes in to annoy Superman, and then he decides, oh, you know what? I know who the Justice League is. Years ago, the one villain that brought you all together and made the Justice League possible was this giant starfish called Starro the Conqueror. So he brings Starro the Conqueror back in and calls it like a family reunion. We have Snapper Carr. I totally skipped over this. Snapper Carr has just been elected mayor of Happy Harbor. And Mixie comes in and just says like, I'm the mayor now, haha, and so you can't stop me. Here's this giant starfish that you all used to fight. He takes 3 of the Justice League members, Green Lantern, Flash, and Aquaman, as like hostage, essentially. And now the still functioning members are saving them. That's the basic plot of the game. The original plot, the one that was in the pitch that I got, was that there was a talent show in Happy Harbor, and the Justice League were the guest judges of it. And Mixie comes in and says, I win the talent show, you can't stop me, Starro the Conqueror is here. And so we initially worked with that, and I think that somebody at DC suggested, maybe this isn't as high stakes as it could be. So they threw out a couple of other suggestions, and then I just decided one day I like the idea of him declaring himself mayor, which has precedence in comics too. Like there was a time in the 60s when he did that. He just called himself mayor of, I think it was Metropolis, but, and then just kind of ran with it from there. They either they liked it or they just decided it was too close to change. I don't know, but I think they liked it.
Nice. So you mentioned that the main villains are from the 60s era. Is this an era that you're pretty familiar with?
Strangely enough, no. I don't read, so if you know anything about superhero comics, this is called the Silver Age of superhero comics. I don't read a lot of Silver Age stuff. I'm mainly a fan of like 80s and on. So like the Bronze Age to modern, that's what they tend to call that. The writers that I was reading in the 80s were coming up in the 60s.
Yeah.
So they were taking these 60s characters and putting their own spin on them, and that's how I learned about all of these things. So while there is a Silver Age lean to a lot of this stuff, there is also kind of a postmodern, if we want to get like literary and technical, there's a postmodern spin on it because that's just how I felt.
And so I hear you talking a lot about DC characters. I also noticed you wearing a Vertigo character on your shirt.
Yeah.
You DC guys that die in the pool?
When it comes to like mainstream superhero comics, yeah, I'm more of a DC guy. I got nothing against Marvel, but I just tend to gravitate more towards the DC characters. I think the reason, if I were to put a reason on that, is just because like I think the philosophy of DC is more catered towards my taste. The way that I always describe it is that like Marvel characters are characters that you can see yourself in, but DC characters are characters you wish you saw in yourself. And so there's like more of the philosophy of their characters are similar but different enough. Superman is like a character you want to strive to be. He's like the good guy all the time. He believes in humanity. He has endless hope. Like that's a character you want to be. Tony Stark, Iron Man, is an alcoholic womanizer. Things you don't want to be. But you may look at that and say like, oh man, he has some traits that I don't like, but maybe I kind of see that in myself. Maybe not like alcoholic womanizer, but like, I got toxic traits that I need to work on. You know what I'm saying? Both of them are great for storytelling. I just tend to like the more mythological stuff that you see in DC.
So are you saying that if Marvel DM'd you through Instagram, you probably say that?
I don't really agree with your philosophy.
If Marvel DM'd me on Instagram and said, we want you to write these characters, I would say a good chunk of it would be, let me research it first. Because if it's not Daredevil or Moon Knight, there's not a whole lot I know about a lot of the Marvel characters outside of just, what I see in movies.
When you say something like, let me research, what would your research process look like? Do you just, it seems like you already know a lot about these characters.
So, that's a really good question. I do know a lot about these characters, but there are still things like you need to research, especially when I say I like stuff from the 80s, like the 80s stuff was a little bit more adult and a little bit more violent at times. Obviously, that does not gel with this. So, like, when it came to, like, Starro the Conqueror, for example, if Starro shoots out these little clones that attach to your face, and then they control your body through, like, a psychic link, well, when that gets removed, in normal stories, you are dead. Like, you're just dead. Obviously, we can't do that in a children's game. So, like, it's more so, it was about, like, researching the spirit of things versus, like, the more, like, scientific, technical stuff. And so I would look up comics that included these characters, and then try to find ones that I didn't already know about, revisit ones that I did know about, and then a lot of reading.
I think that was part of my question too. Was you know, are you trolling comic book stores looking for classic Silver Age comics? Are you on the wiki? Are you watching comic story videos?
You know what? I did a lot of like DC wiki stuff to like just point me in the right direction. PHL, the developer, had a DC Universe like login that I could just log into if I ever needed to like read a book from the 60s or something like that. So I could just get digitally.
So
they just gave me free access to that.
We just get dental. That's great.
Did you see yourself having to like adjust a lot of like more adult storylines, issues with this, similar to this story?
I mean, I knew from the beginning this is going to be something that's for children. So like, I tried to avoid that as much as I could. There were things that like I wanted to, like I have like a checklist of things that like, make sure you don't do this kind of. So like, nobody ever talks about getting killed. They talk about like, they might say like they're going to get destroyed or stuff like that. Like euphemistically, we'll talk about, but obviously we're not going to talk about the finality of death in a children's game. But there were other things too that I was really surprised that we got away with. There's a side quest that features the bounty hunter Lobo, and Lobo is, he never curses in the comics, but he says words that are almost, like they're dirty sounding. And I remember writing the script. By the way, side note, Lobo is the most fun I've ever had writing a character, ever. And so like, when I was writing it, it's kind of just like, okay, I'm gonna write it the way that I would, and then they're gonna tell me what I need to change. So I wrote it as if it was like a teenage audience, essentially. I wrote his almost dirty sounding words that they're made up, all words are made up, but they're not real words, but they got that little like, if your mom heard you say it at the dinner table, she might be like, what? They didn't change a thing. The Lobo script is exactly as I wrote it, with no changes at all. Which was nice, because it felt like I got it right the first time.
Nice, yeah.
I think that brings up a question for me then is, so if Lobo was the most fun, does that translate, when something's fun, is it easier? And
Yes,
okay.
1,000%. It's like, if you ever take like a writing class, they always tell you, read your stuff out loud to yourself, especially when you're doing dialogue, because that way you're going to hear if it sounds like a real person would say it. So I do that. When I'm writing something, I'm saying it out loud to myself. And so like, once I had that, like the voice of what Lobo sounded like, it was just, I knocked out his entire, it's probably like 6-7 pages of just straight up dialogue. I knocked that out in maybe half an hour.
Did you ever bounce your ideas off? Do you have like a person that you bounce ideas off of, or do you just work
Oh yeah, it's hard to do because when you're doing stuff like this, you are under a contract. You can't tell anybody what you're working on.
That's right.
But I would go to my comic book shop, the one I've been shopping at forever, and talk to the owner. And I wouldn't tell him I was working on something. It was just kind of like, what do you think Lobo would do in this situation? Do you think he would do this? And if he said like, no, I don't think so, we talk about why.
Is that a local comic shop?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Comic headquarters, South County. I work there on Sundays. I'll be there tomorrow.
You ever get people coming in asking you what quick characters would do, and you're like, no, wait a second.
Not yet.
I'm kind of still stuck on this topic, but I'm just fascinated. Who's the hardest to write?
The hardest to write for me was Batman.
Really?
Yes, because I love Batman, and he's like, Batman, when it comes to superheroes, Batman is my favorite character. So to me, it was just like, I need to make sure that I get him right.
you want to do it justice.
Yeah, pun intended.
I feel like Batman's especially tough in like a kid's game. He's in lots of stuff. He's not inherently an adult character, but there are like these different.
There's an expectation of him to be more adult, you know? And so like the way that we handled that was just like we just figured out hone in on like certain characteristics and just exaggerate it. So for example, Batman is like grumpy, but he also kind of has like he's kind of egotistical. He knows that he's the smartest guy in the room, even when he's not. He knows, like, he's so convinced that he is. But there's also, like, he's a geek. Like, Batman's such a nerd. So he and Superman kind of, like, geek out. There's a point earlier we saw it where, like, they're searching for components, and Batman says something like, "Oh yeah, that's the Bat Signal Booster," and then Superman's like, "That's not a good name. You gotta call it something else." And he's just like, "Fine. Should I call it the Signal Batster?" And he's just like, "Yeah, that's it." And then like Superman's character he's kind of the dad. He's constantly making dad jokes throughout, you know, because like when I think of Superman, I think of he's the whole world's dad. Like that's just what he doesn't want to be that, but he just is. And so like he's making dad jokes, he's making these puns. He's kind of trying to be like bring a lot of levity to the situation because to him it's like things may seem bad, but we're gonna make it through, so we can laugh about it, while also still being kind of authoritative, like telling people, you know, we gotta get this done, we gotta do this. And then Wonder Woman is the glue that holds them together. She's the one who makes sure they don't get like too far off track, that they don't just sit there and start geeking out about like machines and you know stuff like that. But because of her background as like with Greek mythology, she's constantly name dropping. So she'll be like, "Oh, this reminds me of Athena." You know, she's just like she knows celebrities. To her, they're celebrities, right? And so she'll just like name drop them throughout. And so yeah, it's like pick these character traits. She also Wonder Woman is like all about peace, but she loves to fight. Like she was raised to be an Amazon warrior, so like fighting is her thing. She doesn't want to have to do it, but she's not super hesitant whenever the opportunity arises. So like she likes it, and so yeah, it's just kind of picking these different character traits, exaggerating them, playing them for comedic effect, and yeah, that's how you write a video game.
How